Thank you so much, you guys. That is such a spectacular film. It is just so moving, and I've seen it more than once, and it's still just an incredible film. I have to say, I'm probably sharing the same emotions of everyone in this room, which is you got to meet her and talk to her and spend time with her, and I just can't, I feel like some people should just be able to live forever, and she would be one of them. So my first question is, I have 1,000 questions, but how is it that you got to make the film about Maya Angelou, and what is your most amazing memory of being with her?
Okay, so that's two wonderful parts, but because there are some people here that made that possible, I have to say, Susan Lacey is a person who gets it. And so Bob mentioned that that was like the easiest treatment ever, because
the easiest pitch I've ever had.
she gets it. There are a lot of people that are in the industry now that maybe don't know history, and so it's really important to have someone who knows history, women's history, African American history, world history, and so she started us on our way. And then Michael Cantor came in and kept us going. So one of the ways is you first have to get that, that opportunity. And then I think your question also speaks to how did it become us as a team. And for my part, being a filmmaker and living in Chicago, which is not really the film capital of the world, that would be New York and San Francisco for documentaries. I work in a lot of media, and at a point, I was the radio producer for Maya Angelou's radio program on Oprah Radio, so she was my host. And that enabled me to spend, through Oprah Winfrey's generosity, 4 days a week, 4 days a month, from 2006 to 2010, to record shows for the radio program. And when I reached Maya Angelou's home, she said, "Stay with me." So for 4 days a month, I would be in her home from 2006 to 2010. And so as I heard in making the radio program the history that was happening, world history, at the end of that program time, I asked her to do a documentary. And while that was going on, something else was going on with Bob.
In my own mind. I had made a few films for American Masters with Susan, and I guess my interests are two things mainly. They're creative process artists and also political activism, social justice, in a way the legacy of racism. So one day I was thinking about Maya Angelou, and it was kind of a perfect merger of kind of all my interests. I was also a big fan of her work. I know when I read Cage Bird a long time ago, it really had a deep impact on my life. So I started to do some research. I didn't know Rita at the time. And I just started to work on this treatment and research, and like we often do as documentary filmmakers, and came to realize that nobody had ever made a film about her. Nobody. She'd been in many, as you see, she's been in many films. Nobody had ever made a film about her. It was astonishing to me. And I was very curious about that. At the same time, I was introduced to Rita by a mutual friend of ours, and so that at that point we decided to team up, and that was 5 years ago. So these things take time, as they say.
What really impresses me, among the 1,000 things about Maya, is how serious, how much pain she lives with, how highly moralistic she is, and yet she's still sassy and funny and just living her life. Every door that opened, she walked through. She went to Africa. She became a dancer. She became a singer. She did everything. So can you talk a little bit about your creative process in trying to find, there's so much about Maya, and you had to narrow it down to a mere 2 hours, short of 2 hours.
Well, I'll start. And we had to, that was our biggest challenge, was how to take her enormous story. And at first it was going to be a 90-minute film, and it ended up being close to 2 hours. But our strategy really was to take parts of her story that were, you know, emblematic of her whole life, and go into depth on those stories, and to, frankly, to cut out other parts of her life, so it wouldn't feel shallow. So we would have, and also unknown parts of her life, the singing, Calypso Heatwave, the sequence of the Blacks, the Jean Genet play, which is very seldom known anything about that play, even though at the time it had a big impact. So that was the idea, to tell those stories in greater depth, and just to not make it into a whole, you know, hagiography or anything, but to talk honestly about what happened to her and her own self-criticism as well.
I think I would add to that, you know, when you talk about creative process, by the way, Susan, I hope it was poetic enough for you. Thank you. One of the things that you do when you're dealing with a subject versus subject matter, so it's not racism, it's a person. So you're excavating their life. And history, by its very nature, is revisionist, even to the person who's telling it. And so what you have to do is chase the story until it begins to chase you. So an example would be, when we do an interview and Maya Angelou says, Rosa Guy's sister screamed in the UN, murderer, you know that nothing happens in the UN that's not on tape somewhere. So you go to the researcher and you say, find this. If it happened, we can find it. And that brings you to another person. There are two wonderful people here that helped us with the film, but they also are important to Maya Angelou's life. Jules Pfeiffer is here. And we just say, thank you, thank you. But when we found him, and Maya Angelou gave us a list of some people. And when we found him, we knew that he could give us the stories that happened that other people wouldn't know. And so he could tell us the very nature of how her writing came to be by his role in it, and also by the authenticity of the context of history at that time. They were young, as she would say, new as morning, and they believed that freedom could happen any day now. And they were all working on it. So to have that interview, and then to have Bob Loomis here, 36 books, I think, you know, to have him here and to have him share those stories and to tell us about her and the uncanny things in chasing a story like that. He met Maya Angelou in the Blacks before he even knew about her to become a writer. So all of those things happen when you chase the story. So creatively, every scene had to start and end on her. It was her story. That was a rubric. You might want to know what happened to Bailey, what happened to Guy. That's their story. But we had to do that in order to cull it down and then to keep combing the story through like that hair. You just have to keep working with it.
It's incredible. I mean, every scene is really a story. It's such a compact, amazing, wonderful film. And Bob, you weren't as lucky as Rita. You didn't have years of working closely with Dr. Angelou. What was your first meeting with her like? I
did actually meet her once in the 90s. Actually, that's really what spurred on the idea. I had persuaded her to do a voiceover for a film I made for a nonprofit. That's what I also do to make a living. And so I went down to Winston-Salem and recorded her doing the voiceover. And of course, I got my picture taken with her, as you'd want to do. And I'd had that picture on my desk for, 12 years. And it was really what happened was a woman who worked for me, was a big Maya Angelou fan, one day asked me about the photo. And that's what actually set off that process I described. So I'd met her back then. And then when Rita and I teamed up in 2011, we went down to Winston-Salem, and I reintroduced myself to Dr. Angelou. And actually, I remember one very specific moment at the very end of the meeting. We met for about 2 hours and talked about the idea of a film, etc. Then I was actually put on my coat, and I was about ready to walk out the door. And she stopped me and she said, one other thing, Mr. Hercules. And I said, what's that? And she said, you better get moving. And I got chill. I still get chills saying that because I knew what she was talking about, her health. Yes. And it was chilling for me. And we really, Rita and I then went into high gear. We realized we needed to get moving. The funding was difficult, but American Masters, thank God, came in right away before anybody else. So we thank Susan and Michael for doing that for us.
Where were you in the film when she passed away?
By the time, that was May 28th of 2014, we had probably we were almost done with our interviews. So she never saw any of the film. But in her wisdom, she saw it. She was ready to have it done. I think some of those years of spending time with her, it was always a professional time. I knew we had a mentorship and somewhat of a friendship, but when you work with Maya Angelou, you have a notebook of all of what she's going to do, and you better have it together, you know. So there was always that, but I think that she had grown to not trust some of the journalists that wanted to do things, and so during that period, we had established a trust. And so I think that she believed that it would be done. She said 3 things when I asked her to do a documentary. The first thing she said was, you know, I don't need another thing. And I realized, 36 books, 7 autobiographical memoirs, but I also realized the best thing to do at that point was simply to be quiet and wait for her to say the next thing. And then the next thing that she said was, do you know what you're asking? And at that point, I didn't. Later on, I figured out some of it. I was asking her to go back in her life near the end of her life, and she had already done it. And she was going to have to relive that. I was also asking, can I do a huge story? And so, do you have it in you? And do you also know that you're going to do this in a world where you're going to have some of the same issues that I've had with DGA, with whatever it is? You're going to still be a black woman doing this in this environment. And then the last thing she said, because I didn't say anything, was, if you're going to take it all the way, which meant you better do a good job. So that was so that's why I believe she saw it and she was ready to do it, and she knew that it was important because she had just learned Facebook and she had just learned these things, and she said, you mean I can talk to people whenever I want to say something? I'm like, yes. And she would call me, and I'd pull over on the side of the road, and she'd say, I want to say something about those coal miners in Chile. I want to say, and it would go up, and she would go there. It was more, a book was to be printed, but she wanted to be current. And that's why at the end, we show you younger people that she had an effect on, because she stayed current.
Amazing. I have a million questions, but I wonder if anyone in the audience has some questions. Does anybody want to ask the filmmakers a question?
Wasn't she friendly with Nina Simone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, she wrote. It's her quote that's the title of the Nina Simone documentary, as a matter of fact. So they were friends.
What Happened, Miss Simone? That was part of a 1975, I believe it was, Red Book article. And her question to her in that article was, you were going along fine at some point. What happened? But you bring up a point. I mean, she had a relationship with Billie Holiday. That's not in there. There are some of the other icons whose stories to bring in would have gotten us off on another tangent. And everybody in the film, even all the celebrities, they had a relationship with her. That's why they're there. They're not in there because they're who they are. They're in there. She knew the Clintons when they were in Arkansas together. And that's the other thing that Bob was saying. If we told you a story that you already knew, such as the inauguration, then we needed to take it to another level. You needed to know the rock, river, and the tree. You needed to know that President Clinton knew her then. And so that relationships, those were there. And DVD extras, we have them playing cards on Air Force One, she and Secretary Clinton. She encouraged President Clinton to run. So if you're in the film, it's because there was a relationship.
Right. What stories were left out? You and I were talking right before the screening, and I didn't realize that the film was 2 hours, and you said, well, it could have been a series. So is there a favorite
Well, there was one
story?
segment that we regretted having to take out kind of near the end of the editing process, which was her life as a teacher, which really was very central to her life. She saw herself as a teacher. And so to take that out was painful for us. We had a whole segment in there. She used to teach at Wake Forest University. And so that was very painful to take that out. But we had to get it down to a certain length.
And
after we had already exceeded 90 minutes, we were like, we can't go over 2 hours.
And it's in the DVD extras.
It will be, yes. And American Masters website as well.
And we made ourselves feel better about places like that with the germ that you needed to know was how important education was to her. So since that was in the film, we could drop the Wake Forest. But not that we wanted to, but we had to make those kind of choices. She was both a madam and a prostitute at a point. We gave you the prostitution story. We didn't give you the madam story because we couldn't give you all of them, but you got the drift that she reinvented herself after living a life that some people don't reinvent themselves from, so you got that reinforcement again.
And it's clearly a film that will stand the test of time. I mean, this is really, absolutely, we're so grateful that you guys made this film because this will really just be something everybody should see. I'm quite sure.
I mean, I will say, we've shown the film a number of times since the election. And it's very interesting for us to witness the reaction. It's always been, it's an emotional film, and it's always been very engaging to people, and it's a lot of crying and, et cetera. But after the election, it went to another level. And literally, we had a screening in San Francisco. A woman was so caught up in it, she left the theater. And I think it was because she was thinking about what had just happened in this country, and then thinking about Maya's messages about unity, diversity, inclusion, etc., all those important messages. So there's something that happened clearly to Rita and I witnessing right after the election and showing the film.
And you're still doing some festivals. Do we have an air date for Maya yet?
We do, finally, officially, February 21st. At 8 p.m. Eastern Time on American Masters PBS. Common Carriage.
Thank you. I think that it's really important not to look at film as a multiple choice question or a fill in the blank. Because what happens is you may have to do an outline or a treatment in order to get people interested in it. But then you have to really allow yourself to follow the story. And you have to have a lot of faith that the story will, it's like everybody's life. Everybody's life is so valid to whatever that community is, whether it's, home, the last frontier, or whether it's your exterior life. But it was really important for us not to presuppose we knew her. Like many people, like that young woman, found out you don't really know who she is. And so we needed to let you see her as a human being. You see her as an icon, but we needed to let you know that she was a mother, a woman who loved and lost, someone who found love across racial lines when there was a point you're hiding Uncle Willie and then you're falling in love with somebody who may have looked like his attacker. That reconciliation is possible, that the human spirit is that pliable. So I think that we didn't follow. I don't think we did that.
I mean, we had an outline to begin with, but it's sort of like a Rashomon story too. Everybody has a different angle on. Lou Gossett has a different perspective on the blacks versus Cicely Tyson versus Maya Angelou. So it's very different once you get the interviews and start to, weave everything together, and then you start to see different perspectives, and you see a deeper understanding after. I mean, we read all the books a million times, of course, but that's only one thing.
I always think that one of the hardest things about a film is creating the opening, right? So creating even when you know the story, and the last film I made, I did the opening last. So, and you guys had not worked together before, so you're making a lot of creative decisions together, not really knowing each other very well, but obviously loving the subject equally. How did you come about the opening of the film?
Well, we did try many different versions, and we kind of drove our editor nuts, I think. And at one point, I started just editing because it was wasting the editor's, our time. We were running out of money, so we tried different variations. And then I think Rita found this great quote that opens the film. Once we found that quote, everything came together. It's just a great quote about having overcome challenges, basically, and it became really, it was the theme of the film, as is the title. The title was also very difficult to settle on. So once that quote and the title and everything came together, it was the central theme. It was an organizing principle, basically.
I think openings are supposed to be difficult, and I think they're difficult because if we don't capture you in the very beginning of the film, you won't stay for everything else we worked on. And so I think that they don't come first. I think they do come last. And what happened, like 3 pieces in there were the open. The open was the poem, and the cage bird sings with a fearful trill, and that was an open at one point. The rust on the razor that threatens the throat was an open at one point, and it seemed so hard. And then what happened really was we got into Sundance and we had to finish. That's the truth. And
you're not supposed to tell them that.
Well, there you go. So when we had to finish, we were like, oh my goodness, okay, we got to pull this together. We got 20 openings and we just don't want any of them. And then that phrase, you may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. In fact, it may be necessary that you encounter defeat so that you know who you are. And then we went, there you go.
But we found that very late.
Yeah. And that was the thread. Yeah.
And I noticed that you didn't include Phenomenal Woman, which I think is probably, other than the inauguration, the poem most people know. Why did you skip over Phenomenal Woman?
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because at one point that was the title of the film. Because when Hillary Clinton in the teaser opening, she ends by saying, a phenomenal woman was what she was, or whatever she says. And then we had a title up there. We actually had the title, The Phenomenal Woman, but we thought, it would be taken the wrong way. I mean, we understand, knowing the poem, what she means by that, but people might say, oh, this is going to be a hagiography. It's just going to be one of those kind of films. I'm not going to watch it. So we decided not to include it there, and we just frankly couldn't fit in the poem anywhere else. It was just one of those things that we had to cut out. But yeah, you're right. It is certainly one of her most famous poems.
And did she talk about the writing of that poem and what was behind that for her?
That is something that's in a number of the books written. And I think that for me, one, you never hear the poem Still I Rise until the end to the credits. But you hear people say what it meant to you. You hear Secretary Clinton say that a phenomenal woman was who she was, but you also hear some of the other poetry that we wanted you to hear about the cage bird sings with a fearful trill, and you heard all of that. I think people are going to have to go get some books, that's what I think they're going to have to do. There's 36 of them, you know, make Bob happy. There's 36 of them. Yeah.
Anyone else want to ask any questions? Wrap it up. Okay, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
This is a
And
great
thank you,
festival
Jackie.
for us. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.